At 7:15 that morning, they wheeled me into surgery to replace a hip that had been grinding bone on bone for 2 years. At 11:42 that morning, while I was still unconscious on a table with a stranger's hands inside my body, a locksmith named Gary charged my daughter-in-law $340 to change every lock on my house. She texted her sister a photo of the new brass deadbolt with the caption, "Finally our house. She won't be back to interfere. Best $340 I've ever spent." She had no idea what she'd actually just done. Because the house on Birchwood Lane has never once, not for a single day in 30 years, belonged to my son. My name is Eleanor Hargrove. Everyone calls me Ellie. I'm 71 years old, and for 34 years I managed rental properties for half the landlords in this county before I started buying my own. I know real estate the way some people know scripture. I can tell you the difference between a quitclaim and a warranty deed before you've finished your coffee. I can tell you what an LLC actually protects and what it doesn't. And I can tell you, better than almost anyone in my family ever gave me credit for, exactly who owns what and why. My husband Walter used to say I had a filing cabinet where other women had a heart. That wasn't true. I just knew, the way he did, that love without paperwork is how families lose everything. People look at a woman my age with a cane and a bad hip and they see someone who's done. Winding down. A sweet grandmother who forgets things and needs looking after. My daughter-in-law looked at me and saw exactly that. She saw a 71-year-old widow going under anesthesia for 6 hours, and she thought she was looking at an open door. She didn't know she was looking at a locked one. Let me start where it really starts, with Walter, and with a story he told me only once, the year we bought that house. Walter grew up poor in a way people don't talk about much anymore. His mother, Ruth, married a man named Carl when Walter was 9, a stepfather who was charming right up until the day Ruth's own mother died and left Ruth a small house free and clear. Carl didn't waste time. He talked Ruth into adding his name to the deed, for tax reasons, he said. For simplicity. Ruth, who loved him, who wanted to believe him, signed. For years later Carl left her for a younger woman, and because his name was on that deed, he was legally entitled to half its value. Ruth had to sell the house she'd inherited from her own mother just to pay him off. She and 11-year-old Walter moved into a rented room above a hardware store. Walter told me that story exactly once, the week we closed on the house on Birchwood Lane in 1979. "We're doing this different, Ellie," he said. "Whatever we build, it goes in something nobody can walk off with. Not a spouse. Not a bad decision. Not a stranger who says the right things at the right time." So we did. We bought the house outright, cash, the year Walter's contracting business finally turned a profit. And 19 years later, on the advice of a young lawyer named Sandra Kessler who's been handling our affairs ever since, we moved it into a company. Hargrove Family Holdings, LLC. Not romantic. Not sentimental. Just safe. The house has belonged to that company since 1998. Not to Walter. Not to me personally. Not, and this matters more than anything else in this story, to our son Derek. Derek grew up in that house. He learned to ride a bike in that driveway. When he married Chelsea 10 years ago and money got tight, Walter and I let them move in rent-free, on one condition, spoken plainly at the kitchen table the week of the wedding. "This house belongs to the company your father and I built," I told them both. "You live here as long as your family and as long as you're kind. But it is not yours. It was never going to be yours outright. That's not a punishment. That's just the truth." Chelsea smiled and nodded that day the way people nod at instructions they've already decided don't apply to them. I should have paid closer attention to that smile. I need to tell you about Chelsea now, because I don't want her to be a cartoon in this story. The truth underneath her is sadder than the version where she's simply cruel. Chelsea grew up moving. 4 different houses before she turned 13, each one a little smaller than the last. Each move dressed up by her parents as an adventure right up until the year her father's business failed and the bank took the 3rd house while she was at school. She came home to a moving truck and a for sale sign and no warning at all. She's told me that story exactly once, at a Thanksgiving years ago, half a glass of wine in, and I've never forgotten it. I think Chelsea has spent every year since trying to build a house so permanent, so hers, so photographed and admired and pinned to a wall, that no bank, no stepfather, no piece of paper could ever take it out from under her again. Which is, I think, exactly why the truth about that house was going to break something in her. She runs a small home renovation page online. 40,000 followers who watch her repaint cabinets and restyle mantels and refer to Birchwood Lane, more and more over the years, as our forever home. Not Ellie's house we're grateful to live in. Our forever home. I let it go for a long time. People narrate their lives however helps them sleep. But somewhere in the last 2 years, the narrating turned into planning, and I started to notice. She'd mention contractors for a future renovation she hadn't asked me about. She'd refer to my sunroom as the studio we're eventually doing. Once, at a barbecue, I heard her tell a neighbor, quite casually, that they'd inherit the house obviously, since we already live here. Derek, my son, said nothing. I need to tell you about Derek too, because the part of this story that still aches for me isn't Chelsea. It's him. Derek has spent his whole adult life choosing the path of least resistance the way some men choose a necktie, automatically, without thinking too hard about it. He's gentle. He's funny. He loved his father enormously and still keeps Walter's old tool belt hanging in the garage, and used, like a relic. And somewhere in 10 years of marriage, he learned that the fastest way to a peaceful evening was to let Chelsea's version of things stand uncorrected. When she called the house ours in front of me, he'd get a look on his face, a flinch, quick as a blink, and then he'd change the subject. He knew the truth. I'd told him plainly enough times. But knowing a thing and being willing to say it out loud in front of the person you're afraid of disappointing are two very different muscles. Derek had let the second one go soft. Remember that. It matters later, when we get to the driveway. 2 months before my surgery, I fell on the porch steps carrying groceries and found out, in an emergency room at 11 at night, that my hip had finally given up entirely. Full replacement. Non-negotiable. Surgery scheduled for a Tuesday morning 6 weeks out. I told Derek and Chelsea over dinner. I remember Chelsea went very quiet, and then very attentive, in a way that should have warned me. You'll need help after, she said. A lot of help. 4 weeks. I've got rehab lined up, I said. And Sandra's checking in on me too. Still, Chelsea said, and she reached over and patted my hand in a way that felt, even then, like something being decided rather than something being offered. Let us handle things while you're out of commission, Ellie. Truly. Don't worry about a single thing at the house. If you've ever heard someone say "don't worry about it" in a tone that made the hair rise on the back of your neck, you know exactly the feeling I'm describing. I didn't argue. I've learned, at 71, that you don't win anything by arguing with a smile that's already made up its mind. I just started, quietly, paying closer attention. A week before surgery, boxes started appearing in my garage. Empty ones, flattened, a whole stack of them from a moving supply store. For spring cleaning, Chelsea said when I asked. While you're recovering, it's the perfect time to declutter. You won't even have to lift a finger. Declutter. My house. Well, I couldn't stand up to stop her. I called Sandra that same week, not with an accusation, just a feeling, and asked her to have the LLC's file ready, current and complete, in case I needed it in a hurry. Everything's exactly where it's always been, Sandra told me. Deed, operating agreement, occupancy terms. All current. All in your name as manager. Why, Ellie? What's going on? Probably nothing, I said. I was wrong about that. If you've ever felt that particular chill, the one where someone you love is being kind to you in a way that feels like they're already grieving you, or worse, already planning around you, type I felt it too in the comments. Stay with me. It gets worse before it gets better. The morning of my surgery, Derek drove me to the hospital. Chelsea stayed home, to get things ready for when you're back, she said, and kissed my cheek in the hospital parking garage with a warmth that, looking back, was the warmth of a woman who already believes she's won. I went under at 7:15. I woke up in recovery a little after 1 in the afternoon, groggy, my new hip wrapped and aching, a nurse checking my blood pressure, my son sitting in the chair beside the bed looking, I thought at the time, unusually pale. I didn't know yet that Derek had been staring at his phone for the last 2 hours, watching a group chat unfold in real time, and hadn't found the nerve to say a word to me. I found out everything else the way most families find out everything now. Through a 14-year-old with a phone. My granddaughter Mia, Derek's daughter from his first marriage, came to see me in the hospital that evening with a bouquet of grocery store carnations and a look on her face like she'd swallowed something sharp. "Grandma," she said, once her dad stepped out for coffee, "I need to tell you something and Dad said not to upset you but I don't think that's fair. Mia is the only person in this family who has never once learned to choose the easy sentence over the true one. I love her for it more than I can say." She pulled out her phone. "Chelsea had a locksmith come today," she said. "While you were in surgery. I was at the house because Dad dropped me off there after school. There were moving guys too. They took Grandpa's rocking chair. The one from the sunroom. They put it in a donation truck. I sat very still in that hospital bed. Walter's rocking chair. The one he built with his own hands the year Derek was born, out of oak scraps from a job site, the one with the small W carved into the underside of the seat where only we knew to look. And Grandma," Mia said, her voice dropping, "Chelsea texted this to her sister. She showed me by accident, she was laughing about it and turned her phone around before she remembered I could read. She showed me the screenshot. Finally our house. She won't be back to interfere. Best $340 I've ever spent, lol." I read it twice. I want you to understand something about the woman lying in that hospital bed at that moment, still foggy from anesthesia, a new titanium hip held together with screws, reading that her own daughter-in-law had spent the day she was in surgery locking her out of a house that woman didn't even own. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I asked Mia one question. "Sweetheart, did you happen to get a picture of the new lock?" "Just the lock itself. Not for trouble. Just for me." She had 3. "Good girl," I said. "Now I need you to do one more thing for me, and then I need you to forget you and I ever had this conversation until I tell you otherwise." "What?" "Call Harold next door. Ask him, very casually, if he happened to notice anything at the house today." Mia's a smart girl. She understood immediately that I wasn't panicking. I was building a file. Harold Ferris has lived beside us on Birchwood Lane for 29 years. He's 78, a retired county deputy, and the kind of neighbor who notices everything and says almost nothing until it's useful. He called me himself an hour later. "Ellie," he said. "I wasn't going to bother you in the hospital, but since Mia asked." Locksmith van was there from about 11 to noon. Moving truck too, one of those donation outfits. I saw them carry out a rocking chair, a couple of lamps, some boxes. Your daughter-in-law was directing traffic like she was running a job site. "Did she see you watching, Harold?" "She waved at me," he said. "Real friendly. Told me they were finally making the place theirs." I didn't say anything. Figured that wasn't my business to correct. "It's about to become everyone's business," I said. "Harold, would you be willing to say all that again, to someone else, if I asked you to?" "Ellie," he said, "I was a deputy for 22 years. I know exactly what you're building. Just tell me when." I called Sandra Kessler from my hospital bed that night, my voice still a little slurred from the pain medication, and told her everything. The locksmith. The boxes. Walter's chair. The text message Mia had photographed. Sandra was quiet for a moment, and then she said the sentence that steadied me more than anything else could have. "Ellie, listen to me carefully. Chelsea did not lock you out of your house today. She thinks she did. She locked herself and Derek into a legal problem, Sandra said. That house belongs to Hargrove Family Holdings. You are the manager of that LLC. Derek and Chelsea are occupants, permitted guests, nothing more, and that permission has always been revocable. Changing the locks on company property without authorization isn't taking control of a house. It's trespass against your own company, potentially destruction of property, and depending on how this goes, it could be an unlawful lockout under the landlord-tenant statute, because like it or not, that arrangement functions exactly like a tenancy. So what do I do? Nothing tonight, Sandra said. Tonight you heal. Tomorrow, I pull the full file. And when you're ready to walk back into that house, you walk in with paperwork, a locksmith of your own, and me standing next to you. We do this exactly right, so there's no argument to have. I slept better that night than I expected to, for a woman with a brand new hip and a locked-out house. Because for the first time since the boxes started appearing in my garage, I understood exactly what was actually happening. Chelsea thought she was closing a door on me. She had no idea she'd just opened a file. The next 10 days I spent in the rehabilitation center, relearning how to walk with a cane, and doing something I hadn't expected to be doing at 71 with a fresh hip. Quiet, methodical work, from a hospital bed and a rehab room, the same kind of work I used to do for 34 years managing other people's properties. Sandra brought me the full file on day 3. Deed. Articles of organization. The LLC's operating agreement, which named me sole manager. And the informal occupancy arrangement Walter and I had signed with Derek the year he married Chelsea, 1 page, plain language, that Sandra had insisted on notarizing at the time. Thank God, for exactly a situation like this, she said, though none of us had imagined it quite so literally. It stated, in Walter's own handwriting at the bottom, that occupancy could be terminated with 30 days' notice, or immediately in the case of damage to the property. Changing every lock on a house without the owner's consent is damage to the property. I called Derek twice during those 10 days. Both times he was strange, evasive, talking fast about how Chelsea just wanted things settled and how he was sure we could all sit down and figure it out. He did not, in 10 days, once say the words, "Mom, I'm sorry, this was wrong, and I should have stopped it." I noticed that. I filed it away, the same way I filed away the photos of the lock and Harold's account and Chelsea's own gleeful text message. On day 11, a nurse wheeled me out to a car for my discharge, and I looked at Sandra, sitting in the driver's seat with a folder on her lap, and Harold, who'd insisted on coming along for moral support, and because I want to see this, riding in the back. Not home yet, I told them. One more stop first. I'd asked a locksmith of my own, a woman named Priya who Sandra had used for other properties for years, to meet us at Birchwood Lane at 11 that morning. I'd also asked, on Sandra's advice, for a sheriff's deputy to be present for what's called a civil standby, an officer who doesn't take sides, just keeps the peace while a legal property dispute gets sorted out in daylight instead of in shadows. I did not do this to punish anyone. I did it because I have spent 34 years watching what happens when people try to resolve property disputes with shouting instead of paperwork, and it is always, always worse for everyone. We pulled into the driveway of the house Walter and I bought in 1979 at 11:20 in the morning, 11 days after a locksmith named Gary charged Chelsea $340 to lock me out of it. I want you to understand what that driveway meant to me in that moment. I had learned to walk again, one careful step at a time, specifically so I could walk up it. Chelsea opened the door before we'd even reached the porch, her face doing something complicated when she saw Sandra's folder, and Priya's toolbox, and the deputy standing calm and unhurried by the mailbox. "Ellie," she said, too brightly. "You're home early. We were going to call you about some updates we made, but honestly, this feels like a lot for a homecoming." "I imagine it does," I said. I did not raise my voice. I have found, over 71 years, that a raised voice gives people something to react to, and a calm one gives them nothing at all to push against. Derek appeared behind her in the hallway, holding Mia's hand, his face gray. "Chelsea," I said, 11 days ago, while I was unconscious in surgery, you had every lock on this house changed. You had my husband's rocking chair, the one he built with his own hands, driven away in a donation truck. And you texted your sister that you'd finally made the house yours. That's not, she started. I have the photograph of the receipt, I said. I have Harold's account of the moving truck. I have the message itself, timestamped, in your own words. I let that sit for a moment, the way you let a fact sit before you build the next one on top of it. None of that is really the problem, Chelsea, I said. The problem is one sentence, and I need you to hear it clearly. This house does not belong to Derek. It has never belonged to Derek. It belongs to Hargrove Family Holdings, a company my husband and I formed in 1998, and I am its sole manager. Her face went through 3 expressions in about 4 seconds. Confusion. Disbelief. Something curdling underneath both. That's not possible, she said. We've lived here 10 years. Derek said. She stopped. Derek said what, exactly? I asked, gently. She didn't answer. She turned to look at him instead, and I watched my son's face crumble under the weight of a question he'd apparently never fully answered honestly, not even to his own wife. I told her it was basically ours, Derek said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. I never explained the company part right. I just let her think it, because it made things easier. There it was. Not Chelsea's cruelty, in the end, but Derek's silence, laid bare on his own front porch, exactly the way it had been laid bare in 100 smaller ways for 10 years. You let her believe a lie for a decade because correcting it was uncomfortable, I said to my son, not unkindly, but not softly either. And now the lie has cost you both a great deal more than the truth ever would have. Mom, We'll get to you, I said. Chelsea first. I turned back to her. You did not lock me out of my house 11 days ago, I said. You changed locks on property owned by a company, without authorization, causing damage, while the only 2 legal occupants of record, myself and my son, were unable to consent. Under the terms Derek and I signed a decade ago, that alone is grounds for immediate termination of occupancy. You can't just, she started, her voice climbing now, the way voices do when the ground underneath them turns out not to be solid. We've lived here 10 years. We've put money into this place. I redid the kitchen. I redid the whole. You redid a kitchen in a house you were told, plainly, at your own wedding, would never belong to you outright, I said. I understand that's a hard thing to hear. I understand, better than you might think, exactly why permanence matters so much to you. But wanting a thing to be yours very badly has never once, in the history of deeds and title and law, made it so. Harold, standing quietly by the mailbox, spoke up then, gently, the way a man does who's spent 22 years learning when a moment needs one more true thing said out loud. Chelsea, he said, you waved at me that day. Told me you were finally making the place yours. I didn't say anything then because it wasn't my place. It's my place now. That's not how any of this works, and some part of you knew that, or you wouldn't have done it while Ellie was under anesthesia instead of, say, at a Sunday dinner where she could have answered you honestly. Chelsea's mouth opened and closed. She looked, for the first time since I'd known her, genuinely frightened, and I felt something in me soften slightly, the way it always does when someone's whole architecture of self starts to shake. What happens now? She asked, and her voice had gone very small. Sandra, I said. Sandra stepped forward with the folder. Effective today, she said, occupancy for both Derek and Chelsea Hargrove is suspended pending a new agreement with the LLC. Mrs. Hargrove is prepared to offer a formal 1-year lease, at fair market terms, with a written addendum making explicit what should have been explicit 10 years ago. This property is owned by Hargrove Family Holdings, LLC, and no future renovation, listing, refinancing, or representation of ownership may be made by any occupant without written consent from the manager. Rent, Chelsea said, like the word itself was foreign. You want us to pay rent? For the house we already. For the house you have always lived in as guests, I said. Yes. A fair one. Not to punish you. Because a family that can't be trusted to tell the truth about what belongs to whom needs the truth written down where nobody can quietly rewrite it later. I looked at Derek. You're welcome to sign it, I said. Both of you. Or you're welcome not to. But the locks are being changed back today, to my locks, and until an agreement is signed, this house is not accessible to either of you. Derek, for the first time in longer than I could remember, spoke without waiting to see which way the wind was blowing first. Chelsea, he said, and his voice actually held. Stop. Just stop for a second. Mom's right. I let you believe something for 10 years because it was easier than the fight. That's on me. But what you did while she was in surgery, that's not something I'm going to pretend is okay just to keep the peace. Not this time. Chelsea stared at him like she was looking at a stranger. I want him back, Mia said suddenly, from the porch step, small and fierce. The rocking chair. The one Grandpa made. You can't just donate someone's dad. Out of the mouths of 14-year-olds. I'll find out where the truck went, Harold said. Those donation places log their pickups. We'll get it back, Mia. I promise you that. He did, 4 days later, from a thrift warehouse 2 towns over, the small carved W still hidden underneath the seat where nobody but us had ever thought to look. Here's how it settled, in the weeks after, because I know you want the ledger and not just the feeling. Derek and Chelsea signed the lease. A real one. Fair market rent, $1,200 a month, paid to the LLC, with the ownership addendum spelled out in language even a locksmith couldn't misread. Chelsea did not apologize that first day, or the second, or really at all in the way I might have wanted. She's not built for it yet, the same way some people aren't built for cold water until they've been pushed into it a few times. But she paid the first month's rent herself, quietly, without being asked twice, and she took down the caption on her page that called Birchwood Lane our forever home and replaced it, without comment, with nothing at all. Small. But I noticed. Derek changed the most. Grief and shame have always done more for that man's spine than 10 years of gentle reminders ever managed. He came to see me alone about 3 weeks later, sat at my kitchen table where Walter's rocking chair now sits again in the sunroom, safe, and he said, I keep thinking about how I let her believe it. Not just about the house. About a lot of things. I chose easy so many times I forgot there was another option. There's always another option, I told him. It's just rarely the comfortable one. I'm done choosing comfortable, he said. I'm still learning how. But I'm choosing it on purpose now. That's new for him. I'm proud of him. Later than I'd have liked. But there. The rocking chair sits in the sunroom window now, exactly where Walter used to sit with his coffee and watch the street. Mia comes by most Sundays and sits in it while I tell her things her father is only now learning to say out loud. I had Sandra add one more clause to the LLC's operating agreement, the week after all of this settled. A simple one. No future spouse, partner, or occupant of this property may be told, implied to, or allowed to believe they hold ownership they do not hold. The truth of who owns this house will be spoken plainly, in writing, before any wedding, before any move-in, before any kitchen gets redone. Walter protected this house from a stepfather's charm 4 decades before Chelsea ever picked up a phone to call a locksmith. I just made sure the protection would outlive both of us. If you've ever had someone try to take what's yours while you were too weak, too trusting, or simply too unconscious to stop them, I hope this story told you something worth holding on to. The paperwork isn't romantic. It never was. But love without paperwork is exactly how families lose everything, and love with it, written plainly, signed honestly, is how a house on Birchwood Lane has stayed exactly what it always was. Not Derek's. Not Chelsea's. Ours, in the truest sense. Held in trust, in patience, in a company built by 2 people who learned the hard way that the things worth protecting are the things you write down. She didn't know the house was owned by a company, not my son. Now she does. And so does everyone else in this family, for good.